Concussion is a traumatic brain injury. Now, it's a mild traumatic brain injury, but we don't like to use the term mild because that kind of might minimize the potential seriousness of the injury. So we call it a traumatic brain injury. It's a transient alteration in cognitive functioning, the way the brain works, after a blow to the head or a blow around the head that causes the brain to shift, acceleration forces inside the brain.
Dr. Marshall, what are the symptoms and signs that young players and their parents should look for signs of concussions?
Well, there's a variety of symptoms, the most common which is headache, and there's other physical symptoms other than headache, such as nausea, vomiting, feeling tired, feeling slowed down. There's also emotional symptoms, such as feeling more emotional, being very sad, being irritable. There's sleep disturbances. Kids might have trouble falling asleep. Kids might have difficulty waking up in the morning, meaning they need to sleep a little longer. And then there's also cognitive symptoms, whereas the kids have difficulty concentrating in school. They don't feel right. They feel like they're walking around in a fog. So you can see the symptoms vary tremendously from kid to kid with concussion.
So Doc, what's the risk to putting a player back into the line of fire, so to speak, too soon after you think he may have had a concussion?
Yeah, the main risk is developing a condition called second impact syndrome. It's rare, but it's catastrophic. What basically happens is when the brain suffers another head injury while it's still recovering from the first, for reasons we don't quite understand, there's a massive rush of blood flow into the brain that can't escape. So therefore, as blood goes into the brain needs to swell a little bit, but the skull doesn't allow it to swell. So therefore, the pressure doesn't go this way like your knee or your ankle, the pressure goes this way. And if the pressure continues and isn't relieved, well, then the brain can go through what's called a herniation, where part of the brain actually herniates through the skull, and that causes cardiac and pulmonary arrest.
Okay, so if a kid suffers from a concussion and they've been going through the right protocols and everything, what's the proper time or the procedures in making sure that you're putting your child out on the field in reasonable time?
Well, the first thing you need to do is rest. I mean, the whole world agrees that any athlete, any age, any sport, anywhere in the world that suffers signs of a concussion cannot return to play until they're completely symptom-free. So we've known for a long time that physical rest or holding off from playing sports is key, but more recently, cognitive rest is becoming very popular. We're learning that things that force brains to think, to reason, to concentrate and remember, basically going to work and going to school for the kids, that can be detrimental to the brain and prolong recovery. So as soon as a kid gets concussed, they need to be held out from play, held out from school, physical and cognitive rest until they start feeling better. At that point, then we start reintroducing them back into school and then back onto the playing field in a stepwise fashion, as long as they remain symptom-free.
What if someone is demonstrating multiple symptoms?
Well, if they have multiple symptoms, like most of them do, then those symptoms need to be dealt with. Depending how severe they are, if they're not that severe, then the kids can usually stay at home and just rest. Just like if you have the bad flu, stay home, minimize TV, minimize screen time, minimize schoolwork, just basically take it easy, chill out, and let the brain recover. If the symptoms seem to be getting worse, so the kids are deteriorating, they start throwing up more than a couple times in a half-hour period, they're coming in and out of consciousness, they're no longer recognizing familiar things at home like their parents, then that child might need to go to the emergency room right away, looking for some other reasons for their deterioration, such as a skull fracture, bleeding into the brain, other things like that.
So if a kid has had, one or two concussions and they notice that they're getting more or they are at risk of having another one, what should you look for if you're having multiple concussions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that question a lot in the office, is how many is too many? My son's had one concussion. Should he play football or should he play ice hockey or lacrosse the next year? Or my son said 2 or 3, when should I retire? And the answer is there's no magic number. Yeah, 1 is bad, 2 is worse, 3 is bad, but really it's a family decision. There's really no magic number that says this number is okay, but if you get 1 more, you're done. Oftentimes the families decide based on how long it takes to recover from the previous concussion. For example, if their 3rd concussion takes 3 months to recover from, they might be out of their mind to consider playing football again, because the 4th one might be permanent. So it's a family decision to decide when to return and when to retire from that sport.
Now, equipment has changed. Obviously, I played with a leather cap and Jamal played with one bar face mask. But the question I would ask is, I know that mouthpieces are important, helmet. Talk about the equipment needs and where it is today.
Well, The biggest equipment change, of course, has been in the football helmets. Now, there's a helmet war going on as to which one of these helmet companies can have the most concussion-proof helmet. And what they need to realize is there's no such thing as a concussion-proof helmet. Concussions are going to occur whether you're wearing a helmet or not. Now, of course, the helmet manufacturers are trying to put in different materials and different padding inside, outside the helmet to try to minimize the force eventually transmitted to the brain, but there's no way you're going to prevent concussions with a helmet. In fact, the helmets were never even intended to be concussion preventers. They were designed to prevent skull fractures, lacerations, and goose eggs, but not concussions. Mouth guards, that's kind of controversial. There's a lot of literature, a lot of reports out there that saying mouth guards might help maybe decrease some of the compressive forces applied, but they're going to decrease forces applied to the jaw. I haven't seen any literature that says a $2 boil and bite found at a sporting goods store or a $200 custom from a dentist is going to prevent concussions when the blow comes to the back of the head. Now, the athlete goes head to head, head to ground, head to knee, head to post. Having an expensive mouth guard, I haven't seen any reports that that's going to minimize concussion risk.
But you do recommend making sure that you're tightening your chin strap and making sure that your helmet is tight and ready to go before going out on the field.
It's very important that the helmet fits properly. And I tell athletic trainers or coaches or even parents, a good way to tell whether the helmet is fitting properly is grab the face mask and move it back and forth. That head inside the helmet should move with it. If the head stays still and the helmet moves up or down, then that helmet needs to be tightened. A lot of the helmets nowadays have the air bladders in them, so they need to be pumped up. So it's important that you walk around the sidelines throughout the game and make sure the kids have proper air in their helmets. And definitely the chin strap, that's very important too for a good fit.
Let's talk about the NFL and other leagues are really kind of shying away from contact. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because of concussions. I mean, concussions don't occur unless there's a collision. So what they're doing is they're starting to limit contact in the practice fields. Pop Warner Football, one of the largest youth football organizations in the world, really, last year they came out with a rule where they're limiting contact in practice, and then when there is contact, the kids have to be within, I think it's 3 to 4 yards apart. So much for the Oklahoma drill or the firecracker drill or bull in the ring that we grew up with. Those are no longer allowed at Pop Warner. And then during contests, you know better than I do, the NFL is starting to fine players for head-to-head hits or leading with their head. So they're trying to change the way kids are taught how to tackle, change the way pros are tackling on the field.
What should that parent look for out of that coaching staff to make sure that they know the proper protocols and that your kid is safe?
I think if you're in a state that does have legislation that requires coaches to be certified, make sure that coach has gone through the protocols and does have that certification, that he or she has been trained in recognizing, managing concussions, understands how to evaluate kids on the playing field that might have signs of a concussion, because they're not always going to have a doctor or an athletic trainer on the sideline, especially at practices. So they need to be aware that they are trained in recognizing what to do if they should see that. Another thing I think is very important is CPR training. Not all states or not all districts require coaches to have CPR certification, and I think that's another important thing that the parents should look for in their coaches.